One.
Welcome to another literary reading from the Alaska Quarterly Review and the Anchorage Museum at Rasmussen Center. You can find recordings of the previous star-studded programs at our website, aqreview.org, and on our YouTube channel. And in honor of National Poetry Month, today we're going to hear the work of three exceptional poets, Robert Davis Hoffmann, Marlin M. Jenkins, and the late Eva Saulitis, read by her sister Mara. Welcome. I'm Heather Lendy, the Alaska State Writer Laureate, and on behalf of the Center for Narrative and Lyric Arts, thank you. Thank you very much for being here today. Gunashchish, as we say where I am, on the banks of the Chilkat River in Haines or Dayshu, Alaska, the land of the Tlingit, Xaashuch'eet, and Xaashuch'eet. While this program is free, AQR, like all literary journals, could use your help, so please consider a donation to support the publication of fine writing. And now I'd like to introduce Ronald Spatz, who's the co-founder and editor-in-chief of Alaska Quarterly Review. Ron is a professor of English at the University of Alaska, and Ron is a former National Endowment for the Arts Fellow and the recipient of 2 Alaska Governor's Awards and a Contribution to Literacy Award from the Alaska Center for the Book. Under Ron's 42 years now of enthusiastic leadership and vision, Alaska Quarterly Review has created and continues to make strong connections between our state and the larger literary community, and has also been influential in supporting new and emerging writers, as well as presenting works that include a rigorous questioning of larger societal issues. Ron?
Thank you, Heather. And welcome everyone to the first of our 2 National Poetry Month events. This event, as Heather said, will be available on the Alaska Quarterly Review YouTube channel. Please feel free to watch any of our prior programs and to share them. Alaska Quarterly Review is committed to presenting these programs without any charge and to showcase vibrant and diverse new and emerging voices in literary conversations with depth, complexity, and humanity. Before we begin, I'd like to make a few important acknowledgements. Alaska Quarterly Review acknowledges the Anchorage Museum for hosting and providing technical support for this event, and the Center for the Narrative and Lyric Arts, Alaska Quarterly Review's 501c3 umbrella organization, which makes this event possible. I also want to make a land acknowledgement. Alaska Quarterly Review recognizes the indigenous land on which all Alaskans live. AQR is located in Anchorage, and Anchorage is Dena'ina homeland. Dena'ina is the language spoken by the traditional, present, and future caretakers of this land. Land acknowledgement opens a space with gratefulness and respect for the contributions, innovations, and contemporary perspective of Indigenous peoples, and marks our collective movement towards decolonization and equity. And now to begin, Heather Lendy will be introducing our featured poets. Heather is the author of 4 books of nonfiction, all published by Algonquin. If you lived here, I'd know your name. Take Good Care of the Garden and the Dogs, Find the Good, and Of Bears and Ballots. Back to you, Heather.
Thank you, Ron. It is my pleasure to introduce our readers today, some really fine poets. Marlin M. Jenkins was born and raised in Detroit and currently teaches high school in Minnesota. He's the author of the poetry chapbook Capable Monsters, came out from Bull City Press in 2020, and a graduate of the University of Michigan's MFA program. He's worked as a teaching artist, a university lecturer, and a bookseller. In addition to AQR, his poetry, fiction, and nonfiction have been published by MISNA, Missouri Review, Indiana Review, The Rumpus, Waxwing, Kenyon Review, among others. Marlin M. Jenkins, who says, I like to tell people that I became a poet because I was an awful rapper. I mean, I've liked writing for a long time. I started writing because I really struggled with loving reading. I liked reading a lot as a kid, but by around 6th grade or so, he says, I just had such a hard time being engaged with so much of the stuff that I was assigned that I figured if I wrote my own work about things I cared about and was invested in, then those would be the things that I'd want to read. Robert Davis Hoffmann is a multi-talented, a poet, a carver, a sculptor, a painter, and a mixed media artist, a theater set designer, and a workshop teacher. He's the author of SoulCatcher from Ravenbone Press in Sitka, and a new and selected collection is forthcoming from the University of Arizona Press. In 2009, Alaska Quarterly Review published a special feature devoted to his poems. His poetry is anthologized in Into the Storm from Orca Press, in the Dreamlight, 21 Alaskan Writers with Copper Canyon, Harper's Anthology of 20th Century Native American Poetry and Writing, Raven Tells Stories, an Anthology of Alaskan Native Writing, Strong Hearts, Native American Visions and Voices, Alaska Quarterly Reviews, Alaskan Native Writers, Storytellers, and Orators, the expanded edition, which was also includes the original edition. Native Universe, Voices of Indian America from the Smithsonian National Museum of the American Indian. His collaborations include We Come Out of the Fog with Martin Brody, composer, and the 3 Sitka Portraits with Owen Underhill, composer, and the Vancouver Bach Choir. His tribal affiliation is Tlingit from Kake, Alaska, the Dakwedi clan Xaay Hit, or the Yellow Cedar House. Robert David Hoffmann, who says, I like to revisit home literally and figuratively, our village history, our stories, our relations. I like to get close to nature, the woods, the beach, the ocean. I like to experience the spirit in all things, to be among the animal people, the sea people, the sky people, even the tree people. I go to the woods and then I talk to the medicine I come back with. Eva Saulitis died at age 52 in 2016. She was an author, poet, and a marine biologist who studied marine mammals in Prince William Sound here in Alaska. Eva was most known, well, in some circles most known here as her poems, but really for her research on the Chugach transient killer whales of the A1 pod and during the decimation of the habitat after the horrific Exxon Valdez oil spill here in 1989. Throughout her brief but full life, Eva published 5 books that encapsulated her research and her personal life. Becoming Earth from Boreal Books and Red Hen Press, Prayer in the Wind, also Boreal and Red Hen, Into Great Silence, a memoir of discovery and loss among vanishing orcas from Beacon Press, Many Ways to Say It, again from Red Hen, Leaving Resurrection, Chronicles of a Whale Scientist from Boreal. Her essays and poems have appeared in many journals and anthologies, including AQR, in which one of her essays was cited as a notable essay in the Best American Essays. Orion, The Sun, Northwest Review, Prairie Schooner, Quarterly West, the Utby Reader. Eva was a good friend to AQR and a frequent contributor to our pages in poetry and literary nonfiction. She was also an inspiring teacher at the University of Alaska in the MFA program, which is my alma mater. She was one of my teachers. Her poems will be read by her sister, Eva Saulitis, a family physician living in Santa Fe. And the Saulitis sisters are first-generation Latvian Americans. Of Eva, AQR contributor Naomi Shibab-Nye says, quote, the intricate preciousness of each moment, life, place on earth. Who has ever told of any of this with more exquisite, moving prose or compelling tenderness? Thank you forever, Eva Saulitis. Your readers will continue to be moved and changed. And former Alaska Writer Laureate, the late Frank Sos, noted this about Eva's passing. It's grievous to consider that such a lovely and complex voice as this has been cut short. Eva had a remarkable ability to pivot from hard circumstance to an insistence that we be aware of the rich world she loved. Through the gift of her words, she has made a rich life those who read her will continue to inhabit. Maura?
Thank you, AQR, and thank you, Ron Spatz, for keeping my sister's voice alive, for all of your support of her work over all of these years, and I'm really honored to be here. I also want to dedicate my reading this evening to the people of Ukraine. Growing up as a first-generation Latvian American, we were siblings to the Estonians and the Lithuanians, but cousins to the Ukrainians. And my sister and I always referred to that group as the Liths, Laths, Ukes, and Stones. And so this reading is also for them and for their freedom. I'm going to start with a poem that was published in the fall and winter of 2004 in AQR. And this poem is called Married Couple Singing. Aglona, Latvia, 1964. And speaking of history, 57 years we have been married. So long, when we sing, our mouths form the same O, our heads inclined together, our eyes do not meet. His stiff back, my arthritic wrists, noses the same potato shape, forgotten tubers in the center of our faces. The exiled grandchildren call us Zemniaki, peasants. This place, old country. They want to inherit our ethnic names, my flowered shawl, his strong hands. Not our histories, not this place, the wrecked thatched roof farmhouse where I bore their father, where we slept nights through the occupation on mattresses stuffed with straw. Not our memories of the war. They keep us like a photograph over a mantle, a farm couple, singing folk songs, scarved, booted, wrinkled, rotten apple faces, his tight tweed vest, straining buttons, dingy undershirt, smelling of onions, smoke, manure. My coarse cotton skirt, apron cinched above a belly bulge where I rest my hands. Relics, discarded by history, vanishing people, and so it would be equally quaint for me to sigh, say, I was young once. Instead, I give them this. They can call it inheritance if they wish, a dream I had last night. In the center of our far Latgalian pasture, a brush fire blazed, heat driving flames upward from feverish coals into the flat pot metal sky of early spring. So hot it had sunk a black trench into the ground. Around the periphery, 2 panicked ash gray mares galloped, my body not in the flames or on the trampled grass. I saw it as God might, a scene with no one in it. That fire, still burning, a great pit in the center of my life, around which something never stops running. And then I'm going to read 2 pieces that I actually have that were never published anywhere. One is not even named. I have a lot of Eva's work from her lifetime that I kind of flip through from time to time. And I thought that these 2 pieces fit in well with the other series of poems. This first one was probably written in 1999. You tell me your memory is a room stacked with newspaper. Sometimes you enter, swipe dust off the stacks, turn the brown pages. Some you never looked at. You left us those, and they are silent. Is this organic, this gesture of one hand, this surrender, the way your surgeon says one brain hemisphere disconnects from the other? Is this the gesture of fireweed and wild rose, horsetail and lupin, stinging nettle, to lie down at last, say nothing comes between us now? Or is this the moment when rain begins? Wind begins, a sound like someone moving a heavy armoire, or the oak chest of drawers in my childhood room with the warped oval mirror and aluminum sheen. Birch limbs flail like scissors, crossing themselves, and last leaves break free, career past my window and land, a flock of brown birds in the sodden field. I would show you pictures of this bay, now overlain with peach and pale blue light, jagged between clouds and mountains. I would show you, here is Tuesday, and here is Friday, noon. This is your daughter, Eva, and this, and this. Rain drums the roof at night like your fingers, and the wind, a moan, a chant, a hum, a brushing shoulder, indifferent to me. I like to listen to the rain, Mama, on my red tin roof. When it drums harder, I'm relieved. It's a release, a long exhalation after holding my breath, or the way it stops, as if it never was at all, as if it had always been this silent. And then this one called Black Bread written sometime probably around 2003 or 2004. My mother is knitting one of her shawls. Her hands are working. They can't stop. Her eyes are watching television at the same time they are watching my father. My father says, in 10 days. In 10 days, it will be different. He'll be back there on the front lines, his legs frozen. He says now they are working on his hands, cooling them slowly. Touch them, he says. The cold is traveling up his arms like birds crawling backwards up a tree. When we were little, he planted 1,000 trees in our backyard. He wore a handkerchief on his head. Now, the handkerchief, knotted and smelling of sweat, is the same thing. The same thing as the spruce sapling down in the hole, is the same thing as his Latvian army uniform. Anything my mother says, he can't hear it. We translate. Say, Dad, Mom says you can't leave yet. She hasn't finished your scarf. That's right, she says. My mother's hands repeat this request all day long. Her mouth, shaped like an acorn. We hand her words to him like morsels of strong black bread. A few words, and then he sleeps. The next poem was published in the AQR Spring Summer 2007. And this one reflects her deep connection to the natural world and her constant attempts to find her place within that world. It's called It Begins in Ice. I don't know what we expect to find, something blue and pretty, not how the world begins in ice, not how it's still being created, here, past and future, exactly the same. How we float in between slicken sides, our fingers poking out of fingerless gloves. We belong to the older world, clad and lush. This creation of our country, chaotic, wild, doesn't recognize us. We weren't born yet. The ice pulls back unlike the tide, exposing nothing alive, just natal parts, rock flower, newborn scree, a template for the first lichen. The glacier's intelligence is unfathomable to us. Who, hiking up the moraine to where the ground is barren, could feel at home pitching a tent? Even the alder thickets don't invite us to build a fire, squat with a mug of smoky tea, listening to the one sparrow claim his undisputed terrain over and over. In the morning, when we pack to go, we're relieved, hearing the sudden cracks as the faces give way, unloading a wall of Jesus ice into innocent milk of the fjord. There are places on earth that aren't our home, scenery about which, cameras cocked, we can't say, when you look at this, you can see forever and not be afraid. Here, past and future, always backing away, leave us marooned. If we put our ear to the ground, we won't be reassured. We don't belong here. We never did. And from AQR Fall and Winter 2008, Heaven and the Fallen World. To stand in the woods and watch the St. John's Day fire, the Latvians holding glasses of schnapps, to stand in the woods unseen, to watch the women in knee-length skirts, in pantyhose and pumps, the men stripped of their ties and jackets, to see them again, Mr. and Mrs. B, oak leaf wreaths crowning their heads, leaning against each other and singing as if nothing's happened, as if Mr. B had never collapsed dead at his carpentry bench, as if Mr. K had never discovered the spot on his lung, to see the men light each other's smokes between songs, light them from their own burning ends, tossing the butts into the fire, to see anorexic Mrs. K crunching almonds snuck from her pocket, as if she still had a stomach, to see her again in her tan pantsuit, the amber rings loose on her fingers, as if she still had limbs. The men heave more logs onto the fire like there's no tomorrow. Through the dark backyard, my mother strides to the house on two strong legs. She's going to fetch the Xaashuch'eet, yellow and dense, studded with seeds. Just this morning, she must have unpeeled the cheesecloth, placed the loaves on platters. To see her hurrying like she'd never had an aneurysm. To see my father reaching for the next bottle, like the past wasn't banging on the door of the house, wearing an SS uniform. To see him pulling out the cork as if he had never at 85 opened that door and invited the war back in. Just like the old times. Soon the neighbors will call the police now that the fire's so big, now that it's midnight and the ancestors have arrived, armed with their koklas and pranks. To see them jumping over the flames, singeing the hems of their tautistarpas, chasing each other through the garden. To hear the songs getting older, calling up the gods of thunder and fire. To see Mr. K feeling up my mother, his big hand crawling along her thigh. To see my father checking out the breasts on a Baltic beauty who's just arrived from 1904, a basket of blackberries in her arms. And that's the last straw. I slip into the woods like I did as a girl after crawling out my bedroom window. I run through the trees, up the bank to the vacant lot where the boyfriend sits in the car, smoking, waiting for me, waiting to take me out of this nightmare into his own American version, his right hand on my thigh, the left handing me the bottle of wine, the sweet kind that tastes like blackberries, that makes me believe there might be a heaven. And this next one, all of those poems that I read were written pre-cancer and published pre-cancer. And then the next one I'm going to read is from the spring and summer 2014. And this is during cancer. And it's from her book of poems, Prayer and Wind. And this is a Prayer 28. And of note, it's the date that it was written is in here. And it's January 16th, 2013, which is 3 years to the day before she died. Imperfect birds, saffron finches, they don't hail from here, but from South America, where caged the males are used for blood sport. 2 girls for every boy, and territorial to boot. Troopers, they take to it. Tanagers, like the scarlet of my youth. My mother loved them at the feeder. Look, look, pointing. Tenengers, the R rolled. She said also linoleum, trader's Joe, nuthatcher, other Latvianisms. To pray is to follow one word to its next, a pilgrimage, a trail of seeds, crumbs, or dead grass, where saffron finches hoard for nests. A pinch of precious saffron threads heated in a pan of milk yellowed my mother's klingers, braid of yeasted golden raisin-studded bread for our names days. From memory to philology, the trail goes. But the saffron finch has its story too, and I don't know how it arrived, in whose cage or breast pocket, upon which storm or consequence. Considered common, tolerant to us, itself displacing native birds. No surprise being lovely with its tangerine face as though dipped in the fruit's bleeding rind. My mother arrived by boat, the General Sherman. She was raped by another immigrant. Never lost her accent, never perfected English. For 60 years, never told anyone. Said to her daughters only, from you, men just want blank. We filled in the rest. And then, because I know that I'm getting close to my time, I think I'm going to end with a poem from Prayer and Wind. It's Prayer 21. It's one of my favorites. I have it actually framed on my wall. And it just reflects a bit of my sister's incredible wit and just part of her personality. And so I'm going to end with Prayer 21. This is a prayer for the waste. Days, hours badly spent, forays into the internet jungle land of links from the launch of the words, symptoms of recurrent breast cancer. For tangled sheets and novels whose plots are long lost, for staring at ceilings in the dark, trying not to blink, for wasted fibers at coffee shops or newsstands waiting for delayed flights, for Scrabble, the Weather Underground, www.whatever.com, for catalogs, trying sweater after earring, convincing myself I require new shoes and a more neutral color palette, for staring out the window, waiting for dawn, or the mail truck, or the right line, for lingering near the duck pond for no good reason, arranging books alphabetically and by size. To what end? For cleaning, wiping counters of someone else's crumbs and butter smears, cooking by recipe, generally an excuse not to be doing something hard. And hey, why are those trees just standing there? Bum birds hitched to their bum limbs, wind blowing their errant leaf tinsel and whatnots. Everything waiting for the cows to come home. When they don't, when they won't, ever. They're cows and need to be driven. This is a love poem for the cows. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Maura. Yeah, we all miss Eva, don't we? Now, Robert, you're next.
Thank you. I want to thank AQR for hosting this event and Ron Spatz for inviting me to read. These first two poems come from poems that were published in AQR in the 2009 publication. This poem is called Carving. Caution, old man, master carver, perched on alder chopping block. Sleek killer whale dives in his palm. Slice, chip, gouge, flick, pungent cedar escapes. My tools stay so sharp this way, just from use, Caution explains. Is he playing with me? I can't tell. He puffs into the blowhole, cedar shaving spray. Pointing with the tip of his knife, he tells me the importance of design, the overlapping form line, how the central ovoid repeats itself. At his feet, haphazard curled spirals, circles, and intermittent commas form, like some kind of calligraphy or magical equation. The carver leans toward me. Does the wind around Raven sculpt Raven? Or does Raven sculpt the wind around himself? Do tide flats emerge? Or is that tide woman pulling back her blanket? What matters is not what's left to the eye, but what's taken away. That mistake, that little slip I made yesterday, good or bad, is what I'm left with now. Caution, swimming in my head, casting out my urgent things of the day. I can't listen to Caution without getting lost. I don't tell him. What we omit sometimes is of the same consequence as what's brought out. And this is a poem that means a lot to me. It was written for my uncle Topsy Xaashuch'eet. He was my clan uncle from the Xaashuch'eet clan. It's called Reconstruction. I thought my life was in layers, like a complex cedar blanket's warps and wefts, foreground, background, the native, the not native. It couldn't unravel. My father thought Tlingit, but spoke English. I always heard we live in two worlds, heard we learn who we are by living right with the land, that it should feed us like mother with milk. I never hunted, could not speak the language of the forest, never fished, could not dance with the river. To make sense of this place, I tried to reduce it. Mud flats here, cliffs there, clouds above, sulfur, rock, evaporation. But for all the details, it could not come to life, had no spirit. I puzzled with this. I heard we learn who we are, by being a warrior. I trained myself to be angry, to be at war. On my head, a fierce killer whale helmet with a fin that slashes, water roiling and adversaries coming out of nowhere, like Nazi Chlanet's killer whales seeking vengeance. My uncle was different. He wore tubes that fed him oxygen the summer I lived with him. One day, when the water was smooth, we took our uncle to the Sockeye stream. It was all over the sea bees. We were so proud to get him out. We brought his air. We pulled in fat halibut. There was so much. We thought we fished good, but the fish came to us, Topsy said. Gliding across the strait, we took our uncle to Skanach, Saginaw Bay, ancestral homeland, Tsagwedi Killawell clan. We sat there. The boat hardly rocked. A whale broke the water at the base of our last fort that stood far above us. Topsy held out his arms, reciting the names, even the people, where Raven danced and flirted and played, where canoes arrived and were greeted or destroyed. How things that seem mythical unfolded here, right here. I felt it. We all did. And we understood. We didn't bring our uncle here. He was bringing us here, home. I thought I needed his memories, his life. But he told me, you know, even when you know the answers, listen, just listen. He said my uncle told him that. He was showing me the way to be human, played me the tape of our last real leader. He was listing the qualities of a worthy chief. Your people should always see smoke drifting from the smoke hole. The voice was calm and sweet like water. It was satisfying in Tlingit. He played its length and studied me. Did you hear? Did you hear it? I said, but it was in Tlingit. He pointed to his heart. In my teacher's presence, I felt so safe, like sitting at the fire pit. I would have to design the dance staff to tell our story, Tsagwedi. I struggled with it for nights, pinning worn-out photos to the clothesline I strung. The Kake dancers, their drums, their paint, elders long gone. Old regalia, old Kake, they were fading. I wanted it. I wanted it to come back, for Topsy's memories to be my memories. So I played the songs. I turned it real loud till the house itself sang, till the photos began to dance and sway, till the designs came on their own, just like the sockeye in July, just like the whale met us at Skanach. I saw it like it was floating in front of me. 2 killer whales, 2 houses. There were 2 killer whales joined by a single tail and seals in the body, Tsa. It's like that, connected, not disjointed. When Topsy came from the hospital, I wanted to be the man he described. I confessed, that's not me. He put his hand on my heart. You just have to listen, nephew. It will all come to you. If you stop fighting so hard, it will. And then this poem is an old poem. It's from the original SoulCatcher, which was published in 1986. This is called He Was a Dancer. He was a dancer all over the floor. The bed of hemlock that was the ocean. He rode it, swimming through the air with fists of feathers, 70 years and still lithe. I wanted to move like him, bare feet coming down exactly to the skin-tight drum. Cawing like raven, he had long silver hair that whipped and kept your eyes from stopping on the old dance blanket. I wonder where he kept it hidden, his only property. His shack by the Humpy Creek, the smokehouse after the fire. It was a hard life for him after his wife died. He made his rounds at just the right time, returning home with gunny sacks of canned goods tossed over his shoulder. He was a dancer, wool and sweat. He died drunk, sprawled with no blanket in a fire-gutted house, Indian village, Sitka, 1975. No teeth, almost deaf, death grip on wine jug. Once again, somewhere, he makes the rattle sing. Sealskin, ermine headdress, button blanket, unfolding themselves. Once again, somewhere, the singers recapture their notes, their persistent songs, pulsing with the diving figure, his arms outstretched. Where's Grandmother? These next two are unpublished poems. The missionary tells us the mortuary poles are not good for our dead. We should put the bodies in the ground. We should abandon these poles. They will cause sickness. He says he can save us, that our shamans cannot. What truths shall we live by now? What laws shall we follow next? Great-grandmother's bones neatly arranged in a case behind glass in the museum. It's a sin. A sacred reliquary that held decorated chests of human ashes. The pole tries to stand, plank cover pried off for display. Detritus filters down onto conservator's paper at its base, waiting for analysis. Just over 100 years ago, this pole would have a natural life and death. It was salvaged, the catalog says. Where are you, grandmother? Gusuwa akdakanuhu. And the last poem, in Mannheim. In Mannheim at the train station, it is easy to get swallowed up in a sea of people, figuring their next destination. Easy to move in the wrong tide. We drag our baggage, our tourist words, and lay out the city on a table. The post-war chessboard, N5, K2 blocks. We find the English-speaking baker so we can have our taste of Germany. We pass the beggar who is nobody's business, whose life is buried in his rags. We are in the habit of looking ahead or to the side or down or up. The people are like their buildings, solid as stone. We break off to the side by a chink in the fence. Engineers penetrate a city beneath this city. There are brick rooms, storage, Roman arches, ovens. In Heidelberg, we saw walls shored up, a fortress, strong, massive. Outside, there were threats, but in the hamlet, a warm fire, bread and cheese for the traveler who made it past the gate. On Otto Beckstrasse, in our private loft, the newscaster speaks our language, one hand touching the war-torn countries. With our train tomorrow, we have little time to think twice about that legless man. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Robert. Those were terrific. Marlin.
Hello. Really excited to be here. I love when National Poetry Month comes around and we can do cool things like this. So thanks so much, AQR, for having me. I'm going to start with a poem that is in the winter spring 2021 issue, and then we'll go from there. So if you don't know this reference, you've almost certainly heard it referred to. There's these old commercials for Tootsie Pops, Tootsie Roll Tootsie Pops, in which this boy was going around asking how many licks it takes to get to the center. And he goes to this owl, Mr. Owl, and asks him that question. So this poem is based around that character. It's called After the Passing of Mr. Owl, the boy, still uncertain of how many licks it takes to get to the center of a Tootsie Roll, to get to the Tootsie Roll center of a Tootsie Pop asks, Mister, what is there at my center? Yours. How do you feel about what clings to the trees? About a neck that turns all the way around? Mister, why do you count so fast? Why are you so impatient? Why are you so uncomfortable with my questions? Mister, I can't find Mr. Owl. Will you leave too? Kid, I can't count the ways I tried to get under my own skin. Was better at it sometimes than others. Not sure what I wanted to find though, or why. It is true. Each Tootsie Roll center has the same flavor, but it'll taste different depending on which colored exterior still has residue on the tongue. But don't get me started about trees or owls. Those seedy carnivorous fuckers. Just ask the mouse how wise the bird is when it's rising off the forest floor with talons in its back. But I will note this. Where we lived, we didn't have forests. I don't think I even ever saw an owl until I was 19. For that matter, I didn't think I'd make it to 19. For that matter, I grew up accustomed to small numbers. Miles to walk from school to home, 2. Number of houses away from home, I was allowed to ride my bike, 5, or 4 if we measure it in trees. And this was before I developed a fear of bicycles, along with my fear of everything else. Some numbers start to grow larger though. Number of dogs we had growing up at various times was at least 5 that I remember. Number of years I wanted to get out of there, 14. I don't mean that hood in Detroit. I mean that house. I mean my skin wavering like loose shingles, my fingers itching to taste the meat of me. Okay, we'll get into some more poems. These other poems are very new, like written within the last couple of months new. This first one is dedicated to my dad. A couple of months ago, he was very sick with COVID, and he has recovered a lot and is doing all right now. But for a moment, it was not looking particularly good. So this is a poem I wrote during that time. It's called Pushing a Broken Cart Through the Unplowed Target Parking Lot. Today, my father told my sister, don't forget me, as his lungs seemed to be forgetting how to draw air. 4,000 miles from him to her, another 1,000 from her to me. Breathing heavy now, I'm not sure I'll make it to my car. I get stuck and push, my huffed breaths appearing as smoke. Can barely cross the lot, let alone an ocean. At home, an expired passport. Here, in the cold, I forget to put my gloves on before I step back outside. Dad would have scolded me. How are your knuckles, son? Remember, it's easier to get sick through the cracks. My skin never forgets how to break. To cold, dry, and open cross-stitch lines into delta a wound. The lines like the branches of bronchi. I know it's bad because he actually says it's bad. I suggest an oximeter, but know they're less accurate on dark skin. I tire of the trope of a black man's breath. We are lucky this is not what will take him. But before recovery can begin, I remember once, years ago, I was still up late and the malfunctioning fire alarm woke him. My father, martial arts master, who taught me new ways to break my fall. Poster boy for composure, the most balanced man I know, startled, disoriented, tripped as he stepped from his dark bedroom doorway. I did not know how to fix the alarm. And caught in the surprise of seeing my father fall, I could not see how to help him up. Okay, I'm just gonna check my timer. Okay. This poem is called Unwell. Also, if there's a weird sound in the background, it's my radiator that's having problems. Maintenance hasn't come yet, but maybe the mic isn't picking it up. Unwell. From which springs the undeveloped serotonin, seraphim of fear, familiar shadow under each set of wings. Is this of what our elders warned? Is this the dark through which we must weep, swept in the dull whip of whispers, ripped from stacked carved rock to the residue of debris slithering in the water? I reside with no base for baseline, the cost of madness, hoping it won't pull us apart. Is this what's wrought, what we were meant to reap? A shout that echoes up the enclosed corridor, down in a sick system, a quickening sickness, reaching into dark toward each imploding nova. Every nigga is a star. Some stars burn bright, a billion years just to burn out. What then is the difference between shoot and fall? I ended up down at rock bottom, embedded in bedrock, drowning in aquifer, bound to underground current. I held the hammer, hoping to fix, got dizzy on a wheel meant to build and became ceramic vessel cracked, called insane, called by inside voices blaring outside voice. Vehicle for both the underground river and the one adrift on unraveling raft. A slip back to future and past, the present bubbling with what's repressed. I guess depression binds to the soil's nutrients and weaves into the tree's leaves veins, the grass's blades, an anxious knife obsessed. At some point, we slipped from lawn to where we hoped to draw what will satiate, but then we slipped in, unheard splash, and now we hope, at least, if someone lowers the bucket, it won't be too slippery to grip. Okay, let's see. I am going to do two more poems. I'm gonna pull a poem from my chapbook here, Capable Monsters. And this book is it was a lot of fun to put together. It uses the references or kind of the encyclopedia from the Pokemon video games as kind of a through line. I promise it still makes sense if you know nothing about Pokemon, but there are a lot of references and it uses that kind of as an organizing device. So a lot of these poems are titled after entries in the Pokemon Pokédex. So there's the name and number of the Pokemon, and then there's a quote, and so that kind of kicks off the poem, and then it goes into it from there. So this one is Pokédex entry number 131, which is the Pokemon Lapras. And the Pokédex encyclopedia says, people have driven Lapras almost to the point of extinction. In the evenings, this Pokemon is said to sing plaintively as it seeks what few others of its kind still remain. You find yourself in a dark room where Drake and Snoop and Kendrick play at a dance party you stumbled into, and again you hear nigga over white speakers, and uncomfortable only begins to explain how you feel, and you're the only Black person in the room like you've been so often, and people are trying to get you to dance, but you just want to leave. Shit, you just want to leave, but they want you to dance, to enjoy this. On the anniversary of Michael Brown's death, on a day where you feel so few and wish to sing the song of your own, authentic and rugged and sweet, and the circle of people feels like a circus ring, or maybe more like a cage, or maybe more like a ring of thieves, and you say to yourself, it's just music. I mean, it's just a birthday party. I mean, it's just people having fun. Just the smell of booze and sweat in a dark room where people are just people and just celebrating. But that doesn't stop you from feeling out of place and scared, profoundly upset, to say the least. Because you know your people keep dying while your music plays at parties where before you walked in, there were no Black people. So you leave and go listen to your own rap music from your own iTunes, on your own headphones, on your own laptop, to hear the songs of us trying to remain, to survive, despite, to sing something, to find each other again. Okay, thank you all again for having me. I'm going to read just one more poem. This poem is called Glint. Glint. The deep rainbow of oil slicked in the supermarket parking lot calls to me with its dark beauty, to step in and paint dirty my already worn white shoes. At camp, the bonfire's reaching tongues ascended to try to lick the tree. I would throw whatever trash I had in to see what colors the garbage would burn, turn from waste to green or purple glow. Fall. The horse pulled a hayride and I traced the patterned indentations the straw left on my thighs. I can no longer see oil and not think of the ocean bloated with it. A duck or otter mucked with viscous liquid, now just black and not glinting. I can't see a horse without thinking of the bloodied day when the marchers were met on the bridge and trampled, baton and hoof making fragile work of brown encased bone. How's that for nonviolence? Even the ocean catches fire with enough oil or gas. Even a gas can eat through an atmosphere or a lung. I can't stop clearing my dry throat and the groans sink into metronome, turn music to pain and itch. Nathaniel West, a lesser-known modernist, writes, "The physical world has a tropism for disorder, entropy. I can't stop building monuments to the chaos. I can't stop adoring the blood's cool crimson, how it insists on spilling out, sometimes even from a small nick. I tell my psychiatrist, I've gotten very good at finding the beauty in this awful and awe-filled world, but it gets hard to feel it. The head can hold knowledge that the body rejects." Nathaniel again, "All order is doomed, yet the battle is worthwhile. I'm still reaching like that polluted fire. I'm hoping if I reach the branch, I use it not to burn down, but to climb up. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much, all of you. And I know we have a few minutes left, and I'm just, struck listening to all three of you, the connection to the past, the sort of the dreams, the natural world, and how that interprets your own place in the world, or Mara, even, with her sister's poem, but very much the Latvian experience. And I guess, and you don't have to answer this if you don't want, or if you can speak among yourselves, you can talk about anything you want, but I'm just really curious as if speaking about where you're from and trying to help understand where you are, if that's something that is particularly conducive to poetry, and maybe why that's a place for it. And feel free just to interact with each other and share your thoughts about that if you'd like to. And don't be shy. And like I said, if you don't want to talk about that, you don't have to. But I'm just listening to this, just going like, wow, wow, wow.
I think
feel
that.
like, oh, sorry, go ahead, Mara. You first.
Well, I was just going to say that I think that it really is conducive to poetry when you're looking back or remembering things from your childhood or your family's childhood or their history, partly because the memory is fragmented, and there's a way that you can tell the story in these stanzas rather than writing it out as some sort of essay. It's sort of almost like pieces of memory coming through on the page. And so to me, I think some of the writing that I do and a lot of the writing that my sister did had to do with that kind of remembering certain words that my parents would say, or a certain phrase or a turn of a hand. And I think that's just really conducive to the art form of poetry.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I think a lot about Lucille Clifton, probably my favorite poet. And one of the things she said in an interview was something to the effect of, I don't write out of what I know, I write out of what I wonder. And so I think that's one of the big guiding principles for me in my writing. I feel like place and like figuring out what it means to be from where you're from or where you are, and that connection between the self and the world outside of the self. It's such a vast and impossible thing to pin down. Especially, like it's interesting when people are like, oh, I'm from this city, and then somebody else could be from the same city and have a completely different experience. And what is that link between kind of the individual and the collective, especially as somebody from Detroit, like that's a city with so much stigma and associations and assumptions and so many things built around it, but also a place with a lot of diversity. And so I think, yeah, it's something I could write about forever and would still have more to say because it's so complicated and there's so many questions we can keep asking and wondering about.
Robert, you want to weigh in on this?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I think place is a very important concept, especially for me. Our villages are very old sites. Some of the village sites are about 10,000 years old, and our people have faced all kinds of injustice, disasters, and we're still here. And so I think the stories that come out of place, it's hard to separate place from history and separate history from people. So a lot of poetry, it seems to me, is either a record of things that happen, things that happen between people, or they're a wish to be able to respond other than in the way I had responded. So it's an opportunity for me to get to choose a different kind of reaction than a way I had reacted. It's an alternative, and it's really important among our people because we're constantly trying to figure out what kind of person do I want to be. And so to have poetry as a method of exploring what do I want my reactions to be in the face of disaster, in the face of injustice, in the face of anything that we're facing. And I see that in many forms of poetry.
Wow, well, thank you. Those are a lot to think about, and it's our hour is up, and I want to thank you all for joining us today for AQR's 2021-2022 literary series. And on behalf of the Center for the Narrative and Lyric Arts, that's the board that supports Alaska Quarterly Review, all our gratitude and for the generosity of today's writers and our reader, Robert and Marlin and Mara. And please support them and other writers by buying their books at your local bookstore, and also subscribing to a literary journal like AQR. And I want to also be sure to thank Cody Carver at the Anchorage Museum at the Rasmussen Center, who produces this program. And Ron, as always, the last word is yours.
Last word, well, last word is going to be multiple words. First of all, thank you, Mara and Robert and Marlin. It's an honor to meet some of you for the first time, and also a second time, or actually more in Mara's case, 3 times. And very honored that you were willing to support our series. A great reading and powerful. Thank you, Heather, for sticking with this second year of series. And we have one more event. Not only is it going to be a National Poetry Month event, ladies and gentlemen, but it's going to be an Earth Day event. And Heather didn't know this, it's going to go a tiny bit longer, but only a few minutes longer by definition and plan, because we are going to have some conversation that relates both to National Poetry Month and to the nature writers that we have. And we have Ellen Bass, Anne Correa, and Allison Hawthorne Deming are our poets that are going to be featured. And it's going to be a wonderful conclusion of this year's number 2 annual AQR series. And we'll have a number 3 that'll be exciting. And again, I want to thank our writers, my co-moderator who does more than Heather Lendy. By the way, nobody said that you were an Alaska State writer. I didn't remember to say it, and you didn't say it, but you're the current Alaska State Writer Laureate. And a final word to thank Julie Decker, who is the director of the Anchorage Museum at Rasmussen Center, who gives the nod to Cody for us to do this year after year. So thank you, everybody. I look forward to seeing you folks on April 22nd for an American Poetry Month event and Earth Day event.